got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game and the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues. Takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, sleuth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right. Apparently, it's just me. All right. What's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, as well as Gunfighter Beard Company. He is a Marine out of South Carolina who makes all of his products, basically by hand. He orders all locally here in the U.S. and ships here in the U.S. So if you want a great beard and great beard products, smell good, look good, feel good, definitely check out gunfighterbeardco.com for all of his great beard care needs. So, man, we are, depending on how you look at the summer months, I kind of divide summer months into like 3. So I have June, July, and August. So we're coming up to the end of June. We are getting ready to hit July, which means we're coming up to July 4th. So this will be the episode before the July 4th weekend. So hopefully everybody has a safe and happy July 4th. However you decide to celebrate that as far as the long weekend and whatnot goes, and America's 250 years as far as independence. And we are deep into the college football offseason. So with that, I decided to come up with a series of college football for dummies. The first episode was about the offense, and as far as like the very, very bare basics, who all the people are, what the positions do. Then I did defense and special teams. Then I did now I've decided to move on into the conferences. Last week I did the ACC, which I didn't know as much about, and I didn't have I don't really have much ties as far as like personal preferences or teams that I really root for or root against when it comes to the ACC. But one that I do know very well, because I've grown up watching it for so long and so many of the teams, is the Big 10. And the Big 10 to me is probably one of the most interesting conferences. And I only say that because I believe it or not, even though you probably don't see the correlation behind me, being an LSU fan, I live in Big 10 country. I've been in Big 10 country. I've even been stationed technically in Big 10 country for most of my military career. There was only about a span of a year where I was technically in Big 12/SEC country, if you really want to get technical, being stationed and living in Texas. But other than that, I've primarily lived in the Midwest or the East Coast, and technically all of it has been Big 10 country. So I wanted to go a little bit over the Big 10 as far as its history as a conference. It's the conference that is the biggest as far as the number of teams that it has. It's one of the oldest, and it's the conference that has had the three most recent national champions in Michigan, Ohio State, and Indiana. In that order, Indiana having won the most recent national championship. And this conference has a ton of rivalries to go along with it. So to give you an idea as far as the bare basics for the Big Ten was founded in 1896, so they turn 130 years old this year. They are headquartered in Rosemont, Illinois. Originally, they were the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives officially from 1896 to 1987. There's also the Western Conference in 1896 to 1917, and the Big 9 from 1899 to 1917, and then again from 1946 to 1950. They have 28 sports, 14 men's, 14 women's, as far as teams and whatnot goes. Not teams, sports that are fielded. They have 14 men's versions of the teams, 14 women's versions of the teams. And the teams that are in the Big Ten, we have the University of Illinois, the Fighting Illini. We have Indiana University. We have the University of Iowa, Maryland, Michigan, Michigan State, University of Minnesota, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Northwestern, Ohio State, Oregon, Pennsylvania State, Purdue, Rutgers, UCLA, University of Southern California, the University of Washington, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So all of those schools. Now, the Big Ten has probably benefited the most as far as the most recent college expansion, because they got 4 of the teams that have had the most recent success in the Pac-12, as well as the 4 teams that have had a lot of historical success in the Pac-12, with USC and UCLA coming over. Not that Washington and Oregon hasn't had a rich history, but when you look at the overall entirety of USC and UCLA, their history is so great and so long, and USC has had so many Heisman winners, so many national champions, so many first-round picks come out of USC and UCLA. It's absolutely crazy. But to give you an idea as far as the founding members of the Big Ten, so when it was started in 1896, you had the University of Illinois, you had the University of Michigan, you had Minnesota, you had Northwestern, you had Purdue, and you had Wisconsin. So technically they had 6 teams, if I did my math correctly. Math is not my strong suit, so I did that wrong. Feel free to roast me in the comments. And then after that, in 1899, they expanded again. They added IU, they added Iowa, and then that was the 2. Yeah, those were the 2 other teams that they primarily added initially. And then the conference stayed pretty consistent there for a while until 1912. They added their next team. They added Ohio State in. And then the conference stayed until about 1917, when apparently there was an issue with Michigan. In April of 1907, Michigan was actually voted out of the conference for refusing to adhere to the league rules at the time of limiting football teams to no more than 5 games and players to 3 years of eligibility. And consequently, the athletic teams were independent from 1907 to 1908 and from 1916 to 1917. So Michigan was technically kicked out of the Big Ten, and then they were brought back into the Big Ten, which I think they're actually the only team to have that happen. But funny enough, they are also the reason why Michigan State was not allowed to join the Big Ten for the longest time, which, speaking of, after Michigan came back, Michigan State was actually the next team to be able to join in 1950. And then from 1950, they had all 10 other teams. They didn't expand. They didn't add anybody else, all the way up until 1990. And then they finally brought in Penn State. Penn State was an independent for a long time. They finally bring them in. Kind of the same thing. Good historical school, big success. And they wanted better competition. They wanted to, really enhance things. So the conference stays quiet from 1990 until 2011. In 2011, they decide to bring in the University of Nebraska. Nebraska leaves the Big 8, now the Big 12. They leave them to come to the Big 10. More money, better prestige, better conference, better publicity, all of that. So they leave and join. And then there's another little bit of an expansion, because then they move on to the East Coast, because then you get Maryland in 2014 from the ACC, a founding member, and then you get Rutgers from the Big East after the Big East had collapsed. They end up getting them. And so now the Big Ten has went from being primarily Midwest, Great Plains, all the way out into the East Coast. And then really it stayed quiet. It stayed quiet from 2014 all the way up until 10 years later in 2024, when they bring in the 4 Pac-12 teams, or formerly Pac-12, in UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon. Mainly because the Pac-12 had a lot of financial issues as far as the as far as their TV deals. The Pac-12 commissioner at the time, George, I know his last name if I see it. I don't want to butcher it by not remembering it and misenunciating it both. He believed that the Pac-12 was a bigger product than what it was. And to me, and if anybody feels that I'm wrong, the Pac-12 just doesn't have that old school, like the West Coast doesn't really live for football like the Midwest and the South does. Like the South, it's hot. Yes, they have beaches. Yes, they have good food in the South. They have all these things, but football is king. Like football is the lifeblood of the South and the SEC. The Midwest, kind of the same, like, but we have snow. Like we love our fairs, we love cornfields, we love soybeans, we love all the stuff that you do basically in the Midwest, and you have to drive everywhere to get anywhere. But football is like the main thing that you deal with because it's so cold in the wintertime. You don't have anything else to do except be inside. Sorry. So to me, it felt like West Coast football was kind of dying. And credit to George, they had a lot of, they had a lot of interesting teams. Washington had just been in the national championship against Michigan, albeit they lost. Oregon was extremely competitive and is still competitive to this day. Ever since then, they've been a big brand. Utah was winning the conference and was fairly competitive. And then they just had the historical preference, the historical prestige behind it of USC, UCLA, and then the more modernization of Washington, Oregon, and Utah. They had all of that. So I get where he, as the commissioner, is trying to, truly show full value of what the Pac-12 has. But when you have to look at the media markets, when you have to look at, what do West Coast people really look for? What do they want to go for? I'm not saying they don't like football. They probably enjoy it, but it's like there's always a significant time difference. It's like, yeah, I can watch a football game, or I can go to the beach, or I can go for a walk, or I can go for a run. You can do more modern day, and if you even want to go as far as using the definition of this term, progressive things to do than just sitting at home watching TV, and that's understandable. So the West Coast football was kind of dying. And so all of these Pac-12 teams decided they needed to get out. They needed to find a place to escape to. It was first broke by USC and UCLA that they had already decided they were going to try to join the Big 10. They, I guess, put out some feelers, talked to people in the Big 10. The Big 10 said, hey, we're going to extend an invitation. If you want to join the Big 10, you're more than welcome to. So USC and UCLA were the first two to jump ship. Well, then after that, all the other teams were kind of scrambling. They're like, ooh, those are the two old school teams, have a lot of prestige, a lot of pull, a lot of big brand behind them. What do we do if they leave? Well, when they leave, everybody else starts to get antsy. Everybody else starts to get a little bit worried. So Oregon and Washington jump shortly after that. And then this is a Big 10 related, and I'll talk about this next episode as I talk about the Big 12. Then Colorado decides to go back to the Big 12. They leave the Pac-12. And then Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State all decide to leave. But the Big 10 probably got the most benefit because they had the 4 teams with some of the highest winning percentages since I believe it was like 2000, maybe it was 2010, one of the two, of highest winning percentages and the most wins out of those 4 teams coming into the Big 10. So they got a pretty good benefit of, and they were really smart on, okay, this is who we're going to pick. We're going to pick big brands. We're going to pick brands that have been competitive. They've been competitive recently. And now with the introduction of NIL, so, a school like Oregon, a school like Washington, and definitely USC with all the alumni they have, they're able to funnel money into potentially being successful. So it's a cool conference. It is one of those, I'll be fully transparent personally, I'm not a fan of the West Coast teams being in there just because I grew up not seeing them there. To me, the Big 10 is definitely a more Midwestern conference, and that's what it was for an extremely long time, but that's just unfortunately not the case. But nonetheless, though, it does have a interesting group of rivalries. And I am going to take a quick break because I need to send a message to somebody real quick. So I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we will talk about some of the rivalries that happen in college football. So when we come back.
Signed up to fight for freedom. What a price you had to pay. Picture in a helmet, missing family every day. Your Lady Liberty, dressed like G.I. Jane. Some scars we'll never see. She will never be the same. She's a mother, she's a daughter. She's a sister and a friend. Standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. On that old dusty base with the meadows that shine, she's been to hell and back for the stars and the stripes. Your Lady Liberty, dressed like G.I. Jane, and some scars we'll never see, and she will never be the same. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a sister and a friend, standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. Yeah, yes. For the ones that didn't make it, we will pause and then we cry. We can still see their smile in every sunrise. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a sister and a friend, standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcaster Radio, as well as Gunfighter Beard Company. Big shout out to for Coffee Anderson for his song for "You Can't Spell Hero Without Her." Appreciate him. He's been a big supporter for an extremely long time of MBR, so we appreciate him. Letting us use his music and his video and whatnot for that. But we were talking about the Big Ten, the history of the Big Ten, the teams that have added on, why they've been added into the Big Ten. And one of the things I actually wanted to focus on as well is the rivalries in the Big Ten. And part of this is because when you think of rivalries, a lot of people, they'll think about they'll think about the SEC. They think about like the Iron Bowl, like Alabama versus Auburn. They think Georgia versus Florida. You can think Florida versus Florida State, or Florida versus Miami, LSU versus Arkansas. There's so many rivalries just in the SEC. Well, the Big Ten, there's a significant number of rivalries, and some of the biggest probably in college football. And of course, this is a little bit of a tangent, but this goes off into the argument that a lot of college football fans have had of they didn't like that the Big Ten got a media contract deal with CBS. And again, if you're new to college football and you're kind of learning this, a few years ago when this expansion happened, a lot of these conferences had already signed new media rights deals, which is basically what TV programs were going to be allowed to show these games and show these conferences, right? And each conference kind of had its own station already, and then you would sometimes have a little bit of like a trade of, oh, hey, if you have technically one of our teams, like we'll trade you this game for this game, and vice versa, as far as like the media rights and everything that goes into that. So typically it was Fox would host a lot of the Big Ten rights, so a lot of the teams that are listed here. And then they would have a little bit of the Pac-12 teams. They would have some of the Big 12 teams. Now the ESPN, they would typically have the ACC. They have the ESPN. ESPN would have the ACC. They would have the SEC and some of the Big 12. And then occasionally they would also have some of the Big 10. Again, just depending on some of the big time matchups. Fox would kind of trade games with them, and vice versa. They would trade games with Fox if they had teams that were included within their media rights deals and whatnot. But for the most part, when this expanded, Fox still retains a majority of the Big Ten rights. Then CBS, their deal with the SEC was actually expiring. They decided to go over to the Big Ten. They wanted to pay the Big Ten for some of their matchups instead, and be able to play host to the Big Ten championship, more of the basketball games, etc., as well as NBC. So the Big Ten kind of has their toes dipped in almost every major network provider with the exception of ESPN. Now, the only time Big Ten games go over to ESPN is, again, if they do the trade or if it's through the college football playoffs, and then ESPN will typically host some of the Big Ten games. So as far as some of the major Big Ten rivalries that we have, one of the biggest, they call it the game, is Ohio State versus Michigan. This actually goes as far back because there was territory in Ohio that both states were actually fighting for at one point. It eventually ended up getting settled, but for the most, and I believe Michigan I think Michigan ended up getting the land, or Ohio did, one of the two. But nonetheless, that's why they hate each other. Ohio State and Michigan absolutely hates each other. It's probably one of the deepest, most hated rivalry is between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Michigan Wolverines. That's probably one of the biggest that the Big Ten has, that they really highlight every single year. Another one is Michigan State versus Michigan. The fact that it's a interstate rivalry. It's kind of funny. Michigan State for a while there was actually doing better than Michigan, more in the early 2010s than anything. Since then, the script has flipped. But typically for a long time, Michigan State was better at basketball than Michigan. And again, the script at least flipped prior to Michigan's head coach, Dusty May, winning a national championship last year, but he is now since leaving to go be the head coach of the NBA Dallas Mavericks. So that's a significantly big one. And kind of the other cool thing that you'll notice with some of these rivalries, especially more here in the Big West, it's states that are relatively close to each other. It's very much a geographical issue. So like Ohio and Michigan, super close. Michigan is within the same state. Nebraska versus Minnesota. Now that one, there's a little bit of a stretch there, but it's, the Great Plains right in the middle of the country. So Nebraska versus Minnesota is always a big one. Wisconsin versus Minnesota, right next to each other. And if you look into the NFL, that can even extend to, Wisconsin having the Packers in Green Bay and Minnesota having the Vikings there. And it even spills over as far as college football goes with the Gophers versus the Wisconsin Badgers versus the Minnesota Gophers. And then in the state of Illinois, you have its own rivalry as well. You have Illinois versus Northwestern, so Northwestern is closer up to Chicago. Then you have Illinois kind of more in Champaign, kind of towards the middle of the state. They have typically pretty big beef. Michigan versus Minnesota, Battle of the M's. And I believe the actual name is like Battle of the Little Brown Jug or something like that. Some of these also have kind of cool little trinkets that they would have back in the day that they would actually use as a trophy and use as bragging rights, which I always thought was pretty cool. Let me make sure I have all of the rivalry names and the trophies that go along with them. Okay, so Michigan versus Michigan State, that's for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Yeah, Michigan versus Minnesota is the Little Brown Jug. Let's see. Illinois versus Northwestern's Lane and Lincoln Trophy, which makes sense. Illinois is Illinois Lincoln's boyhood home and the home where he was born at. I don't have it on here for a rivalry. There are some that are rivalries, but it's one of those like there's technically one. It's the Illbuck. It's Ohio State versus Illinois, and yes, it is it's a rivalry, but it's not really a rivalry because it's so just one-sided towards Ohio State's side. Um, so I didn't even want to include it on here. Technically, you have Illinois versus Purdue. Again, I don't have it on here, but that's for the Purdue Cannon. Indiana versus Michigan State is another one. That's for the Old Brass Spittoon. That one's a pretty decent rivalry. Indiana versus Purdue, the Old Oaken Bucket. That happens every single year. And then you'll probably see here with the Iowa side, they have beef with Minnesota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, all states that they're relatively close to. Geographically, all makes sense. For against Minnesota, it's the Floyd of Rosedale Trophy. Against Nebraska, it's the Heroes Trophy. And then against Wisconsin, it's the Heartland Trophy. And again, there's some that I don't have on here, like Maryland versus Penn State. That kind of makes sense just because they're East Coast. They're relatively close to each other. It was easy geographically for them to play. Michigan versus Penn State is the Land Grant Trophy. You have Michigan versus Northwestern, technically, is the George Jewett Trophy. You have the game, which is Michigan versus Ohio State. You have Minnesota versus Nebraska. Apparently, I have never heard of this one as far as like the trophy. It's $5 bits of broken chair trophy. I have never heard of that in my entire life ever. I don't even think they've ever advertised that. If anybody is a Minnesota or the millions of Nebraska fans that are out there, can y'all confirm that? Is that true? I just kind of have a hard time believing that. You have Minnesota versus Penn State. They're the Governor's Victory Bell. And then you have Minnesota versus Wisconsin. That's another big one, like I mentioned. That's for Paul Bunyan's axe. So Paul Bunyan's trophy, the Paul Bunyan Trophy is Michigan versus Michigan State. Paul Bunyan's axe is apparently Minnesota versus Wisconsin. And apparently it used to be the slab of bacon trophy, which I feel like is kind of cool. If you would have kept that, I feel like that's kind of funny and practical. You have Nebraska versus Wisconsin. That's for the Freedom Trophy. And then some of these are considered quote unquote rivalries, but again, it's been so one-sided for so long. I don't necessarily see it. You have Ohio State versus Penn State. And then some of the Pac-12 rivalries, you have Oregon versus Washington. I feel like that is becoming more of a rivalry just because of the more recent success, especially on their run to the national title. You know, Washington swept Oregon every single time they faced them, which is honestly pretty impressive for them to be able to do. Then you have Oregon versus USC. Again, kind of makes sense. USC, kind of the more historical, older brand of the Pac-12, and then Oregon, more of the up-and-coming, more recent relative success as far as the conference and whatnot goes. And then you have UCLA and USC for the Victory Bell. That also continues on as far as the Battle of Los Angeles. And there's a lot of other out-of-conference rivalries that happen with the Big Ten. I'd say more than the SEC. Most of them typically are like teams that they used to face previously in whether they were a part of the conference originally or they would just face pretty regular, like Nebraska when they were part of the Big 8/Big 12. They would face Colorado a lot. They would have the Bison Head Trophy. Maryland, if they face Navy, is the Crab Bowl. Indiana versus Kentucky is the Bourbon Barrel. Iowa versus Iowa State still happens. That's for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. Notre Dame is a part of a lot of these because Notre Dame would face Michigan State a lot. That's for the Megaphone Trophy. Then you have against Michigan, Missouri versus Nebraska for the another Victory Bell. You have Northwestern versus Notre Dame for the Shillelagh. You have Notre Dame versus Purdue for the Shillelagh Trophy. And then you have Notre Dame versus USC for the Jeweled Shillelagh. One that apparently they just recently found the actual trophy for. You have Oregon versus Oregon State for the Platypus Trophy, but that's also known as the Civil War as far as the actual battle. And then you have Washington versus Washington State for the Apple Cup. So the Big Ten has a lot of deep rivalries. They have a lot of deep rivalries, a lot of very proud teams. It's and there's always a debate. And again, so if you're new to learning college football, the biggest debate currently, at least in 2026, and has kind of been a debate for the last, I would probably say 10-ish years or so, maybe even longer, has been who is better, the SEC or the Big Ten. And for a long time, the SEC was the conference that was primarily winning national championships left and right. But when you looked at it, and when you really look at who has won national championships recently, it's primarily been the same teams. It's been Alabama mostly, followed by Georgia. LSU snuck in there at least once. You have trying to think of the other SEC schools that have won a national title, at least in like the college football playoff format. I think it's just primarily been those. It's either been Alabama, Georgia, or LSU. Has primarily been it. After that, it's been Clemson. And then with that, it's been Ohio State. They've been able to win two. And then you've had Michigan and Indiana. So, I mean, really, it was the SEC for a long time. Now the Big Ten has started to be able to play catch up. And the argument has been, now that there's the NIL era and now that players are being able to be paid legally, that's why the Big Ten is now more competitive and able to win these national titles, and able to compete more with these quote unquote deeper SEC teams and these deeper rosters and whatnot, is because now they're able to pay their players. Whereas the theory and the rumors is that the SEC was already paying their players before NIL, name, image, and likeness, was technically legal. So it's been a debate for a really long time. So if you're new to that, if the person that you're with or family or friends or where you live at, depending on where you are, they may argue a lot of conference pride. Now, to be fair, it also depends. And that's kind of where rivalries come into play. Like if you live in Michigan and you're a Michigan fan, if Michigan State, for whatever reason, wants to go on a run, or if Ohio State's in the playoffs, you may not root for the Big Ten. You may root like, no, I don't really care if the Big Ten wins. I want them to lose. Now, if you're someone like Nebraska or Minnesota, you may honestly not even care. But some people are weird. Some people want to try to do the like conference pride as a whole. Some just do individual team pride. And then some, it's like, yeah, I don't really care who wins. My team's not there. I don't really care, which is perfectly acceptable. It makes perfect amount of sense. But nonetheless, though, the Big Ten, I grew up watching the Big Ten for a long time. Again, just living here and watched pretty much all these games, Ohio State versus Michigan a ton. I watched those matchups, loved every single one of them. And then as I've gotten older, I've watched more and more. And it's a fun conference. To me, so when I was talking last week about the ACC, there's really no top-heavy, or like there's no favorite heavy hitter. Like the ACC kind of rotates. The Big Ten, for the most part, you have your consistent heavy hitter favorites, and that's typically Michigan. That's typically Ohio State. Now with the addition of Oregon is going to be in there. Historically, prior to last year, and probably for the last 10-ish years or so, Penn State was up there as far as being a heavy hitter. Michigan State would kind of rotate in and out of there occasionally. Iowa has always had really good defenses. More in the early 2010s, you also had Wisconsin that was kind of vying in there, as well as Nebraska. But they've since kind of like come down a little bit. So the Big Ten to me is more top heavy. Now there have been some arguments the Big Ten is really top heavy. The middle of the pack is maybe not nearly as good as, say, like the SEC, who has 16 teams, and that the bottom pack of the Big Ten is like really bad. And I don't necessarily disagree. When you look at somebody like, and if Sam, if you're watching this, I mean, Sam knows he's a Purdue fan. Like Purdue football, especially for the last couple of years, has not been good. It's been really, really bad. But they're kind of at the bottom of the Big Ten. Indiana, prior to Kurt Signetti being there, Indiana for a long time was the bottom feeder of the Big Ten. Northwestern is there as far as being the bottom. You could probably even argue Rutgers is down there. trying to think of who else, at least historically and recently, has really been at the bottom of the Big Ten for a long time. Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Rutgers. That's really it. And I don't include the Pac-12 schools yet, just because they've only been in the conference for a couple of years, so I can't really call them like quote unquote bottom feeders yet. I kind of figured it would be UCLA, just because UCLA has really struggled for a long time to kind of come back to prominence, and then I feel like USC is the stronger of the middle of the pack at the moment. Now they have a pretty favorable schedule. They've done really well with recruiting. To me, this is kind of a make or break it year for their head coach Lincoln Riley. So we might see USC kind of break out from that, but to me, the Big Ten is more. You have more of your kind of heavy hitting contenders that you can see. Okay, I think out of the Big Ten, it could potentially be at least these 3 to 4 teams even that I think are going to win the conference. Whereas the ACC, maybe more likely 1, maybe 2. It's kind of a toss up. The SEC kind of mirrors the Big Ten in that. And I'll talk more about them as I get to the SEC episode. But tune in next week. I am going to talk more about the Big 12, because to me, the Big 12 is the most interesting conference, because they do have a heavy hitter now. But even prior to last year, it's one of those, like, it's pretty much anybody's conference. There's no really favorite. There's nobody that has truly dominated for the conference for a long time, technically since Oklahoma left. Oklahoma, if you want to say, dominated it for a while, as far as being able to make college football playoff appearances out of the Big 12 and win the Big 12 championship pretty consistently. You could say Oklahoma. But really, it's been a revolving door ever since I think 2020. They've had a different championship winner every single year. So I think it's a fun conference. But I will talk about them next week. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Please check out Military Broadcast Radio at mbradio.us. You can find them pretty much anywhere on social media. We have a ton of great veteran hosts. They give advice, they give ideas, they tell stories. Definitely also check out Gunfighter Beard Co. if you want great beard care products. Like I said, he's here in the U.S. out of South Carolina. He's a Marine. It's all natural products. It's no gunk, nothing goofy. You're going to smell good. Your beard's going to be taken care of. You can use it for your beard. You can use it for your skin. You can use it for your hair. Pretty much anything and everything. And if you like this, if you want more of this, if you want to engage, if you want to ask questions, if you have a debate, if you're like, no, you're absolutely wrong, you don't know what you're talking about, check me out on social media. I'm on pretty much everywhere inside the Hoosier Mind: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. But nonetheless, I appreciate everybody. Hope you all have a great 4th of July weekend. Everybody be safe. If you do enjoy fireworks, go out and enjoy them. If not, hopefully you're able to have a good quiet night. Even though if you're medical and I say the Q word, I apologize. But hope you all have a good night, and we will see y'all later. We will see y'all next week.
Hi, I'm Beaker with Military Broadcast Radio TV. We're your virtual MWR, bringing veterans radio, podcasts, gaming, animation, 3D printing, and a community that never leaves you behind. Download our Roku or mobile app today.
Wisdom to share if you listen this week, so pull up a chair and stay for a spell. We're heading down a trail where good stories dwell.